UFC 253 on Fight Island, Abu Dhabi. It's amazing. And you got Paulo Costa is going to be in the main event. And look at this, South Florida's own. This is amazing. I haven't talked to Eric in a while, a few years, couple years, right? It's just a couple years, Eric.
Well, since high school, so it's been
just a couple years.
A while,
just a couple of years.
It's great to hear from you. It's great to see you. When I heard your name on the UFC press conference call, I was excited. I was like, wait a minute, I've known him since high school. So,
wow, we've got history, and it's amazing because I didn't actually know all that Eric has been doing. Coach Jacob at Coral Springs High School, where Eric started in wrestling and graduated. Keep me posted a little bit, but wow, what an amazing, impressive career you've had and are having just by what you've been able to done as a wrestler and then also in training and coaching others. And now you're with Paulo Costa, and he's in the main event of UFC 253, which is amazing. And I want you to tell us a little bit about how you met him and what you've been doing with him training-wise.
I mean, wrestling has just afforded me the opportunity to travel the world and experience things that I would never have dreamed of. Coming from Coral Springs High School, wrestling under Coach Jacob, and then going to Arizona State. I remember Coach Jacob helping me write my letter to apply for Arizona State, and they accepted me. But Bobby Douglas was at Arizona State, and they were #1 in the world at the time, or #1 in the nation at the time. And I won University Nationals 3 times over there in freestyle and Greco. Made the national team. Represented the U.S. at the Pan American Championships, and I got a silver medal. And I also represented the U.S. in the U.S. Army. I joined the Army, raised my right hand, and answered, and entered the armed forces, and I did that for 10 years as well. But I also was at the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs. From the Olympic Training Center and after I retired from the Army, 10 years I did in the Army, my first MMA coaching job was in Brazil. So I went to Brazil.
Eric, were you ever, I was going to say, Eric, were you ever stationed or served in Brazil or no?
No, I wasn't served. I got out the military when I went to Brazil. There's a little chunk in there with a girl and a kid that I'm cutting out, but
but you were in Brazil. Forward. You were in Brazil.
Fast forward, I got recruited to Brazil by Big Nog and Little Nog. Really, I asked them if they needed a wrestling coach, and they did, and I was ready to travel at that point. I was always willing to go wherever it took. I remember when I was in Coral Springs High School, if I would run to St. Thomas sometimes to train because St. Thomas would train on Sundays. So going to Arizona, halfway across the country, or all the way across the country, to go to Arizona State was just something that I was always willing to put myself in places to thrive. And I always if I have 2 choices, I always pick the choice that's going to make me grow the most. And, I could have stayed home and did something in wrestling in Florida, or closer to Florida, but I knew Arizona State was ranked #1. I knew I would get the best out of myself there. And also when I went to the Colorado Springs, the Olympic Training Center, and then when I got out of the military, I chose to go to where the origin of MMA or Vale Tudo. The first UFC was won by Royce Gracie. So when he was Brazilian and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and they have great striking in Brazil. They were just missing one thing, wrestling. And I was the piece of the puzzle that could bring it all together. So I went to the #1 team in the world at the time with Team Nogueira. It had Big Nog, Little Nog, Anderson Silva, Junior Dos Santos, the Ultimate Fighter Brazil champion Rony Jason, Fabio Maldonado, Feijão. These guys were all champions, and there was 2 young guys named the Pitbull Brothers. and so who are now my main team now is the Pitbull Brothers and Fight Ready. But from Team Nogueira, Minotauro Nogueira got put on a show called The Ultimate Fighter Brazil. We had a great season there, and then I went back for the next season of The Ultimate Fighter Brazil, and that is where I met Paulo Costa. He wasn't actually on my team; he was actually on the opposite team, but we were, fate brought us together. I remember I got thrown in the pool once, and my glasses. I got thrown in the pool by the other team, and my glasses were right here. My glasses were at the bottom of the pool, and Paulo jumped in the pool and got them for me. And then, Paulo didn't win the show, but we stayed in touch. And I remember on Facebook Messenger, kind of like how we connected just now, he wrote me a message, say, "Hey, I'm going to be signed by the UFC." And I said, "Hey, well, a couple of things. One, you better start learning English. Let's start practicing. And two, get your ass up to Arizona. Let's start practicing wrestling, because I guarantee within the first 3 fights you're going to have a wrestler." And sure enough, in 3 fights he had not only just a wrestler, he had a national champion from Oklahoma State and a former UFC champion in Johnny Hendricks. And I started working with him then. And we've been together training as a trainer and athlete ever since. And here we are. I want to say 7 years later from when I met him, fighting for another world title number 5.
It's so interesting, the journey and how these things really come together. You mentioned about English, and that's something because also about Brazil, because Brazil is a hotbed for MMA, and we see even in South Florida too, we see a lot of fighters from Brazil coming to South Florida to train. How important too is it, because you mentioned about, hey, you've got to learn English, you're going to be with UFC, and having your fighters that are from other countries like Brazil to be able to speak the language?
Well, for me, that's one of the main things I preach, especially for my guys that still live in Brazil. The guys come here, sometimes they don't learn English, but it's easier for them to get into UFC because you don't need a visa. The travel is least expensive. You can pick someone from Florida, it's a $400 flight. You pick someone from Brazil, you got couple $1,000 flight. You got to get a work visa. You got to pay for all their coaches on all their flights. So it's a lot easier if you're living in America, but you still have to realize that the promotion and your boss's language is English. And I can tell you this, Conor McGregor wouldn't be on the Forbes list if he didn't speak English. If he was speaking Irish or Gaelic. or Russian, he's not in the biggest fights in the world. He's not fighting Floyd Mayweather. So the formula's there, and part of it is to be able to speak the language of your bosses, and more importantly, the fans that pay pay-per-view, that pay to watch you, because a lot of the other countries you don't pay $65 to watch. So you have to connect with the fans that you're trying to attract.
Eric, in your career, did you try MMA?
No, you know what? I lived, I would say, Dan Severn was the first wrestler in MMA or the UFC, and he was from Arizona State. So he was a Sun Devil, so that's when I started watching it. And soon after that, Dan Henderson, who was also another Sun Devil, and a lot of guys, Randy Couture. I've actually been when I was wrestling, these guys were guys that you looked up to. So, but I would say like more of my introduction to something like hand-to-hand combat was in the military. I actually was the officer in charge of hand-to-hand combat. So that was my last job in the Army, and I would train fighters. Me and the Modern Army Combative School, created by Matt Larson, we trained fighters in hand-to-hand combat, and they had to get validated before deploying to Iraq and Afghanistan. So that's kind of like my introduction was, if your weapons malfunctions in war, you got to know how to fight with your hands. And so that's kind of like how hand-to-hand combat came in. But no, when I retired from wrestling and the military, when I was athletically done with all sports, and then I went right into coaching. I had Henry Cejudo. I met Henry Cejudo, the greatest combat athlete of all time. I met him while he was still in high school. He came to the Olympic Training Center, and we were initially training partners, and then shortly, I was still at that point. I was at the tail end of my career, but I could keep up with him. And then after a few months, I noticed him pulling away, and I started thinking, "Wait a minute, this kid's in high school, and he's beating me up in practice." I was like, maybe it's time for me to hang him up. Little did I know he's about to become the youngest Olympic champion in history. And then we I was with him for 4 years as like a big brother mentor type thing, best friends. And then he
did. It didn't make you feel. See, Eric, it didn't make you feel bad then that he was beating you, right?
When he retired from the UFC, and then we've been together ever since. It took 10 years to win his first UFC title, and he beat the greatest of all time to do it. So we've been, MMA has been good to the captain.
Hey, talking about all the things that you did, and you mentioned about serving in the U.S. Army. How proud of you were you to serve your country, and not only that, but to train others who are going into battle and use your skills, your specialized skills to do that? That's just incredible. But how did it make you feel to be able to do that?
It's an honor to be able to use what I've learned on the mat, starting on the mat in Coral Springs, Florida, to instill warrior ethos and America's soldiers, as we fight for freedom. And that's probably when I raised my right hand and swore to defend the Constitution of the United States of America. It was something that transformed me into who I am today. My father was from Colombia. My father's an immigrant, and he wanted to join the military when he came to the United States, but he didn't have his citizenship, and he came when he was 33 years old already. So shortly, I'm not sure if there was a limit, but when I joined the Army, and when I actually became captain, my dad pinned me, and I'll never forget that day. How proud he was that day, and he was crying that day, and that was probably the proudest moment in my father's career and in my father's life. He passed away about 5 years ago, but he came for that moment, that special moment when I was pinned captain.
A part of him was also being pinned captain as well, to be able to do that and share that with his son. That is a special moment and a proud moment. When you think about your history and getting to South Florida, what was it like during that time for you, and being able to be in South Florida, go to Coral Springs High School? How did you get to South Florida, Eric?
South Florida, it was, I grew up my first 10 years in Freeport, New York, Long Island. And then my parents moved to Arizona for 2 years. So 5th, 6th, 7th grade. But then, they separated, and I went with my mom to Florida. We started off in Hialeah, living with my grandma. And then the next stop was Coral Springs in 8th grade, and then 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th. Obviously at Coral Springs High with the Colts, wrestling under Coach Jacob and Coach Hank Johnson, who, by the way, Hank Johnson is a sculptor, and he's the one that made. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Go. I can hear you.
He's the one that made this for me.
Woo! He made the That is great. Eraser. The eraser with the skull on it. Listen, that's pro wrestling type right there, though. That's pro wrestling. That's the mask. That's the villain, the heel.
Yeah, I did. I went up to Orlando a couple months ago, and I was visiting a friend of mine, Kenny Lester. He's from Florida, Orlando wrestler, state champion, national champion. And then he went to Arizona State, but he's back in Orlando, and I went up to visit him after Jacksonville, after Henry Cejudo defended his title against Dominic Cruz in Jacksonville. And as I was there, he does pro wrestling, and I went to watch it. And then he said, hey, and the crowd that day, they said, hey, one of the guys got COVID. We need an extra athlete. We don't have one. So I was thinking, you know what? I tell my fighters, you got to learn English. You got to be diverse. You got to step out your comfort zone. Who would the captain be if he doesn't answer the call when called upon? So I raised my right hand again, and I said, I'll do it. So I got in there, and I went against Daniel Lacey. Big dude. He's like 230 pounds, 6'2". And it's on my Instagram page. My one pro wrestling match, and I wanted to show my fighters that don't be afraid to step out. A lot of we're used, when you come from wrestling, when you come from jiu-jitsu in Brazil, you're quiet, you're humble. You really don't have time to promote a fight. But in MMA, you got months to promote a fight, and this is the sports entertainment business. And I wanted to show them. I wanted to grab that mic after I won that world title and show them how to do it. And I did, and you can see it on my Instagram page.
And that was it. I was going to ask you. So how did that match go? What was it like in that match?
Man, I can tell you, it felt awesome. I was exhausted, but I know how to push through that. It's not nothing I felt before. And, man, it felt like a rebirth. It felt like nostalgic because I did a lot of my old wrestling moves. I did almost all of my old wrestling moves. And, it was like you're competing again. And it was like going back in time. I felt like it was a time machine. And it was it's something you knock off the bucket list. Not everybody can say they wrestled in a pro wrestling match. I mean, I've done a lot of things, but that was something that was pretty cool. And actually, you know what? Now I'm getting called up again to do another one. So who knows? Who knows? Maybe there's something. Maybe there's something there. The Captain America's.
Yes, you already got the name. You already got the name for it too. I've
had that nickname, Captain America, since I went to Brazil. My first newspaper article was by Globo, the number one. It's like the USA Today or the New York Times of Brazil, and they're the ones that nicknamed me. It was called Captain America's Comes to Brazil. Captain America with an A, but after a few years, I was like, well, I don't just train Americans, I'm training Brazilians. My dad's Colombian, my mom's Puerto Rican. I want all the Americas, Central America, South, North. So I added the S to it, so no copyright infringement that I know of. And I could be different than just, I can be more than just America.
And if we go to DC Comics or Marvel Comics, you could be the first Captain Americas and be on the comics.
hey, if that's possible, I'd love to do it. We get in. I'd like to get there before the Paulo Costa's opponent Israel Adesanya does, because he's a huge comic book and anime connoisseur.
Eric, you mentioned that the bucket list, but and you also you're open up to pro wrestling again. Then, right?
Oh yeah, man, who isn't? I mean, I grew up watching pro wrestling. You know.
Any favorites come to mind?
The Rock, the Four Horsemen, Coco Beware, Jimmy Superfly Snuka, Hulk Hogan. You know what's one of the British Bulldogs is one of my favorite, and now I did I forgot to say this. I coached Dave Batista for his first and only MMA bout, and Davey Boy Smith's son, Harry Hart Smith, is a good friend of mine now. So because he was part of the camp with Dave Batista.
What was that like? That's so interesting because Batista's done successful in WWE, Professional Wrestling Sports Entertainment. Now he's doing successful in acting in movies. He had the MMA fight. What was that like? What was he like? What was he like as an athlete? And you mentioned Davey Boy Smith Jr. is his pro wrestling name, but like you said, Harry Smith Jr. What was it like having him involved in all that too?
Man, Dave was amazing. You know, he never actually did MMA before. He was 0-0 and he was 44. To tell you the truth, I can't believe he actually did it, because it is so hard, and the nerves you get on your first fight. Excuse me, and